Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Terry O'Neill. I'm the president of NOW, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the second day of the 2014 Annual Conference of NOW. We are going to get started. We are, of course, a couple of minutes late, but hopefully we'll get into this. This is the plenary where we really sort of take stock. We look at building the movement. What will it take to build our movement, to make it more diverse, more inclusive, and to really dedicate ourselves to an intersectional analysis and an intersectional way of achieving our feminist vision of equality for every single woman and girl in this country, no matter where she lives, no matter what community she's in, no matter what challenges she may be facing in her personal life. So I'm thrilled to, I'm going to be introducing our panelists in just a moment, but before I do, it is my extreme pleasure to be able to announce the Victoria J. Mastrobuono awardee. So Carla Josephson, if you would come up to the stage, please. This year, the Mastrobuono Women's Health Award goes to Trust Albuquerque Women. And Kimberly, if you would join us up here at the podium, that would be great. Respect Albuquerque Women. I am so sorry. It goes to Respect Albuquerque Women. So the Mastrobuono Award is given every year by the NOW Foundation in honor of Victoria J. Mastrobuono, a very generous donor to our organization. She left us an extremely generous bequest, and all she asked was that we do something to honor her gift. So what we decided was, you know, we don't own a building. We don't own a library that we can make. This is the Victoria J. Mastrobuono Library. What we said was, we know we're going to have an annual conference, and we want to honor Ms. Mastrobuono every year by creating an award in her honor, and she was very, very concerned and interested in women's health. So the Mastrobuono Award is given every year to a person or a group in the locality where the conference is held that has made a significant contribution to women's health, to women's reproductive justice, or to some aspect of women's well-being. This year, Respect Albuquerque Women, we thought, was the group that deserved this award. The city of Albuquerque created a ballot measure to be voted on by the good people of this town that would have made it illegal to have an abortion at 20 weeks. And let me be clear, there is no logical difference between 20 weeks, 18 weeks, 15 weeks, even 6 weeks. This is, and it cannot, you cannot, if you criminalize abortion at 20 weeks, you have just overturned Roe versus Wade. We won't take that. So what did the women of Respect Albuquerque Women do? They got together. They formed a coalition. They reached out beyond their city limits to the state. They got organizations involved. They got national organizations involved. We knew that we had to defeat this effort at the municipal level, because if we didn't, you're going to start seeing those kinds of ballot measures pop up in city after city after city. And the reality is the women's movement doesn't have the resources to be constantly reacting to something like that. So defeating this in Albuquerque was absolutely critical, and Respect Albuquerque Women did it. So here to accept the award on behalf of Respect Albuquerque Women are Carla Josephson. She's the president of New Mexico Now, and a key player in the coalition. And Kimberly Inez Guire, she is representing the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. She's accepting on behalf of the national level organizations. Carla is accepting on behalf of the local organizations that brought about this tremendous victory. So I'm going to present the award, and I'm going to ask Carla to say just a couple of remarks very quickly, and Kimberly's remarks are going to come later because we're, kind of crunched for time as always on plenary sessions. So we're going to do a quick photo op for the award. All right, there we go.
This campaign's success would not have been able to happen except for the fact that we started out with a world-class choice coalition. And I'd like to mention some of the organizations that are part of the coalition and that were part of the campaign. AAUW of New Mexico, ACLU of New Mexico, American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, League of Women Voters of New Mexico, Nirvana Manana, of course the Now New Mexico chapters, Planned Parenthood of New Mexico RCRC, Southwest Women's Law Center, Strong Families of New Mexico, the Southwestern Women's Options, and New Mexico Women's Agenda, and Young Women United. A little background that wasn't mentioned in any of the press coverage is that this took weeks and weeks and weeks of community organizing, voter protection efforts, because we had to have people to cover all the polling locations and get out the vote. We had to have organizers who committed to attend all the city council meetings and prepare to speak at all the city council meetings in 2 counties, because at the same time we were doing this battle in this county, we had, we don't want to have a clinic in our community effort that was going on in Valencia County, so we had to go down there and do those council meetings at the same time. And in the middle of the whole thing, the survivors of the Abortion Holocaust Club decided to come to New Mexico and picket all the clinics and go to physicians' homes, and they even picketed in front of the Holocaust Museum. And that was one of the things that really mobilized more people in the community to support us. They were so horrified by that. We also had community organizations that were not part of the New Mexico Choice Coalition who helped us. The faith community opened their doors and allowed us to have organizing meetings in the local churches. And I'd also like to personally thank Dolores Huerta. She came down and did press conferences. She talked at the university. We had an event at the university, and she actually went to the polling locations on election day and did voter protection work. I would also like to send out a thanks to our students at UNM. They did a lot of going door to door, and other members of the coalition went door to door every weekend. We had a stroller brigade that got out. And in our workshop yesterday, we discussed the idea that your coalition should reflect your community. And you can never start early enough to build a coalition. You shouldn't wait until you have a fight on your hands to build your coalition. And I think that we've managed to do that successfully in New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you for everything you're doing here in New Mexico. And thank all of you in Albuquerque and New Mexico and around the country who participated in this amazing victory. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our panelists this morning. I'm going to introduce everyone, and then each of them will speak in turn. They are free to use the podium to speak or to speak from their chairs. Each one of us will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. And because we want to have plenty of time for a really truly interactive session, an ability for the people in the audience to ask some questions and engage with us. So our first speaker is Monica Simpson. She is the executive director of Sister Song, a native of North Carolina, and a proud graduate of Johnson C. Smith University, one of the country's historical black universities. Monica's decision to come out as a same-gender loving woman while attending college led her to become deeply involved in the LGBT community, in organizing both on and off campus. Upon graduation, she was hired as the first person of color at the Lesbian and Gay Community College Center in Charlotte. She has served in various capacities at Sister Song, and she also sits on the board of Resources Generation and the Fund for Southern Communities. Please welcome Monica Simpson. I'm going to introduce all of them. I'm going to have to break down and put my glasses on. Not that I'm happy about it, but don't judge, right? Kimberly Inez McGuire is the Director of Public Affairs at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, where she directs the communications activities and advocates for salud, dignidad y justicia, health, dignity, and justice. And I hope I didn't just mangle the pronunciation too badly. Got it? Okay, thank you. She does this for the nation's more than 26 million Latinas. Kimberly is a reproductive justice leader and a queer Latina with nearly a decade of experience in government relations, movement building, and strategic communications. Kimberly has been featured and quoted in many modes of national media and earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from Hampshire College. She is now studying to become a birth doula. I'm going to let Kimberly tell you. A birth doula is a brave and extraordinary healthcare provider. Yes, yes, and they do amazing, amazing work. So Kimberly can tell you a little bit about the details, but it is a growing area, and it's very, very exciting for women seeking healthcare, especially around birth and pregnancy. Miriam Young is the executive director of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. Miriam is also one of 2 recipients of this year's Olga Vivas Award for activism around immigrant women's rights. And if you were here yesterday, you'll remember her accepting that award. The NAPOF, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, guides the country's only national multi-issue progressive organization dedicated to social justice and human rights for Asian American and Pacific Islander women and girls. With chapters in 13 cities, NAPOF's priorities include winning rights for immigrant women, reproductive justice, and conducting community-based participatory research with young AAPI women. Miriam is a very sought-after public speaker. She has received recognition from the National Council for Research on Women, the New York City Council, and Choice USA. Born in Hong Kong and raised in the projects of Brooklyn, Miriam is a proud, queer, Asian American immigrant committed to social justice and to raising her 2 young daughters to be fearless. Adelita Medina is executive director of Alianza, the National Latino Alliance for the Elimination of Domestic Violence. Adelita has more than 30 years of experience working in a wide range of fields in both the public and private sectors. She was a private consultant for several years, helping to raise funds for nonprofit organizations that serve women and children and families. She has worked for Sister Song and for the Ms. Foundation of Women. She also, the Ms. Foundation for Women. That's not a mistake I make often. She has also published numerous articles on topics ranging from workers' rights, immigrants, veterans' rights, and women's rights to women's health and safety. Adelita. So what we're going to do is hear from each of our speakers in turn, and then we will have a conversation.
Good morning, everybody. It is really a pleasure to be able to stand before you all today and share a little bit about the work of Sister Song and the work that we're doing on some emerging issues that I get to talk to you about. And to share this panel with all these rock stars up here. It's pretty amazing. So for those who aren't familiar with the work of Sister Song, we are a Southern-based national membership organization, and our purpose is to build an effective network of individuals and organizations to improve institutional policies and systems that impact the lives of marginalized communities. And Sister Song's mission is to strengthen and amplify the collective voices of Indigenous women and women of color to achieve reproductive justice, which we define as the human right to have children, to not have children, to parent the children one has in healthy and sustainable environments, and the human right to bodily autonomy and to express one's sexuality. And we will achieve reproductive justice by eradicating reproductive oppression and securing human rights. So reproductive justice created in 1994, so we are celebrating 20 years this year. Give a hand clap for that. Woo! Was created by Black women who envisioned a more intersectional approach to living self-determined lives that incorporated a broader analysis of racial, economic, cultural, and structural constraints on our power. In the Sister Song, we feel that we're at a place right now where the RJ framework is needed now more than ever. We're all familiar with the attacks that are happening against our reproductive freedom. We all heard about the McCullen versus Coakley case that just happened on this past Thursday, right? Yes, boo to that. We know on Monday that we're looking at a decision coming down around the Hobby Lobby case, right? We have a lot that's really impacting our reproductive freedom. And in both of these cases in particular, they are really leaning on this First Amendment right of the Constitution. So I could make an argument here as to why there is a need to root our social justice movements in the human rights framework, as opposed to relying on the U.S. Constitution, which we know wasn't really written with marginalized communities in mind. But because of time, I'm going to leave that one alone. But one of our strategic focus areas at Sister Song this year is building Southern synergy. And within this focus area, I want to talk about two emerging issues that we are seeing as our primary focus areas in the South that we know will also have an impact on communities across the country. And it also provides an opportunity, they also both provide opportunities for us to do cross-movement collaborations, and it also pushes the reproductive justice movement to lean into the intersectionality that we talk about within our framework. So the first is this notion of healthcare as a human right. And I can't talk about healthcare as a human right without reminding us of the continued fight for Medicaid expansion, which is still a major battle in southern states. And we know that also impacts the health and wellness of very vulnerable communities. But the new emerging issue in this area is this conversation around racial disparities in maternal mortality. So Sister Song works in collaboration with the Center for Reproductive Rights and the National Latina Institute to prepare a shadow report to present to the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. But I want to share a small piece from today that's really, that I think really embodies this notion of racial discrimination that's really happening within this area. So the 2014 Trends in Maternal Mortality Report showed that the maternal mortality ratio in the U.S. increased by 136% between 1990 and 2013, from 12 to 28 maternal deaths for every 100,000 live births. This is nearly double the rate of Saudi Arabia and more than triple that of the United Kingdom. The U.S. is one of the only 15 countries whose maternal mortality rate has increased annually since 1990. And it is the highest level of annual increase in maternal death out of all the countries surveyed in the aforementioned report. And despite the fact that the U.S. spends an estimated $98 billion per year on hospitalization during pregnancy and childbirth, twice as much as any other country, its maternal mortality rate has more than doubled in the past 23 years. The reasons for maternal mortality disparities in the U.S. are multiple and complex. However, the high rates of maternal deaths in the U.S. can be explained by racial and socioeconomic disparities, and nationwide, African American women are nearly 4 times as likely to die in childbirth as their white counterparts. As part of our contribution to this report, Sister Song held 2 story circles in Atlanta, Georgia, and Jackson, Mississippi, 2 of the states with the highest rate of maternal mortality rates, to gather firsthand narratives of Black women's experiences from pre-pregnancy through post-pregnancy regarding their access to reproductive and sexual health care, encounters with the healthcare system, and social or economic factors that affect their access to health care. And we are excited that we will be joining the Center for Reproductive Rights in Geneva this fall to present this report to the CERD committee. The second major area of this new emerging issue that I want to talk about really briefly is the over-policing and over-criminalization of marginalized communities, more specifically mothers of color. From forced sterilizations to prisons to shackling of women in labor in prisons to pregnancy criminalization laws that we just saw happen in Tennessee, for instance. We can say that there is a war against mothers happening that needs to be addressed. According to the Women in Prison Project, 1.7 million women in state or federal prisons are mothers. There is a mother who is currently fighting for her life right now and for this not to be her lived reality, and that is Marissa Alexander. How many folks are familiar with Marissa Alexander? So Sister Song has partnered with the Free Marissa Alexander campaign to host Standing Our Ground against reproductive oppression, violence against women, and mass incarceration the weekend of July 25th through the 28th in Jacksonville, Florida, that will include an RJ 101 training, an RJ Summit featuring experts from the fields of violence against women, child welfare, reproductive justice, and human rights, and a march to the Duval County Courthouse with public demonstrations demanding the justice for Marissa Alexander, because Angela Corey definitely needs to hear our voices. So why then, y'all vibe, yes. So why then is this a reproductive justice issue? So Marissa's human right to parent her children in healthy and safe environments was violated due to domestic violence. Her human right to live a self-determined life and to bodily autonomy was violated due to domestic violence. And due to an unjust criminal justice system that lacks the ability to analyze and eliminate racial and gender bias within legislation such as Stand Your Ground, which is what she is trying to use as her defense, Marissa Alexander, a Black mother, was imprisoned. And because of her imprisonment, Marissa was alienated from her children, which included her 9-week-old breastfed daughter. And because of her imprisonment, Marissa Alexander's children have been placed in the custody of the man who was charged with the violent behavior. So these 2 emerging issues, healthcare as a human right, which lifts up the disparities of maternal mortality and the overcriminalization, which lifts up the disparities of maternal mortality and the overcriminalization and overpolicing of mothers, are not just reproductive justice issues. They are economic justice issues. They are racial justice issues. They are environmental justice issues. They are a matter of immigrant rights and civil rights. They demand LGBTQ equality and liberation. They cross all movements, and they charge us to do our work in the only way that Sister Song believes creates change, and that is collectively. Thank you. I look forward to questions.
Terry, why'd you make me go after her? That's not fair. That's not right. Ooh, man, I'm ready to go march with Monica right now. I'm like, whew, all right. Good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here and to see all of your wonderful smiling faces. So if you've read the news or read Guttmacher's terrifying reports with all the charts, it's been a really rough couple of years for reproductive health and rights. But I don't want to talk about that, because I want to talk about winning. Can we talk about winning? Because I think that the people of Albuquerque know a thing or two about winning. And I want to start, so Terry said that I would talk a little bit about our participation in the Respect Albuquerque Women campaign, and so that's what I want to talk about during my remarks today. Both because it was an incredibly exciting and powerful moment of victory for reproductive health rights and justice, but also because the way that the campaign proceeded, the way that the campaign did its work, I believe is instructive of not only how we can win today, but how we can build the movement and the country that will allow us to achieve full reproductive justice for all of our communities tomorrow and into the future. So I want to talk a little bit about how the National Latino Institute for Reproductive Health approached our desire to become involved in Albuquerque. So we've long partnered closely with Young Women United, a local women, can I hear it for Young Women United? Yes, a Albuquerque-born, Albuquerque-based, women of color-led reproductive justice organization that has been organizing in this community long before the national news found it on its radar screen because of the 20-week ban that was being proposed. Women of color have been organizing in Albuquerque for as long as women of color have lived in Albuquerque, which is for as long as Albuquerque has existed and before. And so the moment that we became aware of this challenge and we wanted to become involved, we called up our local reproductive justice advocate friends in Albuquerque and we said, how can we support your leadership? We didn't come in and say, hey, we're a national organization, we've got it all figured out, and we've got some ideas for you. No. We said, we respect you, we respect your work and your long-term organizing in Albuquerque, and our role is just to support your leadership. What can we do to support the expertise and the strategies that you've already figured out, because this is your community that you're fighting for? And the ways that we worked with Young Women United, again, I think are instructive of ways that national organization can partner in a respectful and a productive way with local organizations. And I think it also tells a story about how we can build movements that are truly inclusive of our communities. Reflecting back to what we heard earlier, that campaigns should look like your communities. So one of the first things that we did in working with Young Women United, some of you may be aware of some polling that we did at the National Latino Institute for Reproductive Health that found, shockingly, that a majority of Latino voters support access to safe and legal abortion. And not only that, but actually 8 in 10 Latinos would support a loved one who needed an abortion. Every other day, and we just saw this in the New York Times, we have to hear radio news reports and see it on TV, this myth that Latinos are somehow not supportive of women's health and rights. And that's just not true. Our communities absolutely are supportive. Now, the challenge has been that historically, the choice movement hasn't spoken to us on our own terms, hasn't spoken to the Latino community in a way that we can relate to and that we can connect with. But I'm very pleased to say that that's changing. And so in working with Young Women United, with some of the polling that we had done a few years earlier, we were able to not only identify that the Latino community was a key constituency if we wanted to win in Albuquerque, but also to provide specific messages that would make sense and that would directly connect with the Latino community. We also owe a great debt of gratitude to Dolores Huerta, who is an incredible hero of mine, because not only did she work in so many ways, as we heard on the campaign, but she also worked with us to record radio ads in both English and Spanish that ran on Latino radio stations in advance of this campaign. Now, oftentimes when you hear progressive campaigns, whether they're for abortion rights or LGBTQ equality, communities of color role in securing those victories is either ignored or it's talked about in a way that's the opposite. They're actually often, when we fail to win on progressive issues, at times communities of color have been blamed for this. And when communities of color are engaged, when the communities of color that are already organizing on our progressive issues are part of the conversation, part of the campaign, then these communities are part of our victories. And so we saw, by working with some other national partners, including Advocates for Youth and NARAL Pro-Choice America, once again supporting the leadership of Young Women United and local folks on the ground here in Albuquerque, we were able to marshal resources that helped engage the Latino electorate, which, by the way, forms a huge proportion of Albuquerque voters, and certainly a huge proportion of the women and families that would have been impacted by a 20-week ban. So when we think about what does it take to win and what did it take to win in Albuquerque, it was a coalition that brought together faith leaders, women of color, feminists, folks from all over the map, folks from all over the state with shared vision and common purpose. It was a campaign that actually centered and uplifted the voices of women of color, women like Tania Esparza and Dolores Huerta, and so many of our fierce Latinas who are working and living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Respect Albuquerque Women campaign also put a Albuquerque lens on the issue. This wasn't just a generic, defeat a 20-week ban campaign. This was a campaign that grew out of a community that only the people that lived here truly could understand. And those of us who watched from afar, I live in Washington, D.C., and who did what we could to support, I think where we saw our support be most effective was when it was supporting and lifting up the leadership of those who've been working here for a very long time. And so when we think about what does it take to win, I would encourage us to always think about how we can include all of our communities, not just in the outreach, but in the leadership, in the press conferences, in those moments of visibility. And also how we can make sure that however we can play a role, whether we're a national organization, whether we're a volunteer, that we first and foremost look to the community where the fight is happening, look to the community that has been struggling, and center their values, support their leadership, and with that, we can have more wins like Albuquerque. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Miriam Young. I'm with the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. I'm based in Brooklyn, so you can take a girl out of Brooklyn, but you can't take the Brooklyn out of the girl. I just got to do a few shout-outs to start this off. Shout out to Brooklyn. Is that what yeah. Shout out to my fierce Asian American Pacific Islander sisters in the audience. We may not be many, but we are fierce. And I also shout out for today being the 45th anniversary of the Stonewall riots to this day. Do we have any Stonewall vets in the audience? No? Hey! 2 Stonewall vets in the room 45 years ago, starting a riot, throwing some fire around, barricading police in a bar. Some amazing activism that a small group of people who were fed up were able to do, and look at how far we've come 45 years later with all the advances for LGBT liberation and equality. Now, I start by thinking about that because I know tomorrow is the annual Pride March in New York City, which is the longest consecutively running civil rights march in the history of the world, right? Because in 1969, there were the riots, and then the next year, queer people gathered back together and remembered the riots and took to the street, and we've been taking to the street every year since. There's something powerful about building momentum by doing something yearly, right? And coming together and remembering and having ritual in that way. So I want to thank Terry for having me here because I feel like this, I know, is a now ritual and also a ritual for the feminist movement. So thank you. It's an honor to be here. And it's an honor to be honored with the Olga Vives Award, who I got to work with and did fierce immigrant women rights organizing, along with the Latin Institute when we started the National Coalition for Immigrant Women's Rights. So I was thinking about Stonewall and how groups of small people can do enormous change. And I have a really simple message on this panel, which is Asian American Pacific Islander women and girls want and are the secret weapon to the new feminist movement we're building. We really are. So there's this perception that there are not a lot of Asian Americans in this country, right? And historically, that may be true. Although the first Asian Americans, or Asians to come, were in the 1500s, where a group of Filipino sailors were brought to Louisiana. At that time, they were going to be sold off to slavery, and they said, hey, I think something's not right here. So they jumped ship, and they actually colonized Louisiana. And there's like a group of peoples in Louisiana who could trace their lineage back to these really smart Filipino sailors who were like, I ain't down with this slavery thing, right? And then, of course, the Asian Americans were here and built the railroads and during the gold rush. But we're completely invisible from any of those celebrations. If you recall the picture of the golden spike, right, that met the railroads in the middle in Utah, not a single Asian American face in that photo, even though tens of thousands of Asian Americans labored, and many died and were underpaid compared to their European immigrants counterparts. So until this year, the contributions of Asian American railroad workers went unrecognized, right? And this year, Tom Perez, the new Department of Labor Secretary, just officially enshrined the Chinese railroad workers into their Hall of Fame. Some justice after how many years? Maybe a couple of hundred. Yeah. So after the railroads and the gold rush, there was an effort for many of the Chinese laborers to settle in what in Chinese we call the beautiful country, right? Meiguak, that's what that means. And America's response to that was obviously, as you know your history, no, right? And the first anti-immigrant law that was ever written, the first immigration law that was ever written in the United States was called the Page Law. Which specifically prohibited Asian women from coming to this country. And they did so by labeling all Asian women prostitutes, right? They said, if you're Asian, you're coming because you're a prostitute, and we don't want prostitution, and we don't want your kind here. It was followed quickly by the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, which wasn't lifted until well into the 40s of this country. So Asian migration and immigration to this country has been purposefully suppressed in this country, which is why in 1965 there were fewer than a million Asian Americans living in the U.S. Today there are 19 million Asian Americans living in the U.S. So as I like to think of the math in terms of percentages, for every queer person there is, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender queer person there is living in America, there are actually 2 Asian Americans. We're twice the population of LGBT communities. And some awesome lucky folks like me are both. We're like the Gaysians. Yeah, okay. So I know that the perception of our community that is being small and underrepresented is actually quite false, right? And that really what we just have to do is listen to the voices of Asian American feminists who have been standing up and declaring that we need to be seen, we need to be heard, and watch out, we're gonna be fierce. So NAPOF invites you all around the country in your NOW chapters to really connect with us, to learn more about the community, and to connect with the Asian American activists movement that is building up. And as I said, we are, in terms of this new minority-majority country and in terms of this new American democracy that we are facing, Asian Americans are going to be a key voice and key constituency in this. We were able to do some extraordinary polling work last year, speaking to over 6,000 Asian Americans in 10 different languages. And we found there are strong progressive values within our community. So every issue that you've heard from on this stage, from economic justice to workers' rights to abortion rights to women's rights, are largely supported by the Asian American community. For instance, 67% of Asian Americans support raising taxes to reduce the deficit. Less than 35% support the Ryan budget, which we've talked about, right? 70% of Asian Americans identify as environmentalists. 71% of Asian Americans believe in a legal right to abortion. Over and over again, we are here ready to stand up to be the fierce champions for progressive change.
Before I start my talk on gender violence, I wanted to acknowledge, well, thank NOW for inviting me as part of this plenary. I'm honored to be here in the company of so many committed people. I just want to let you know that we have several new NOW members who are part of my board and staff. Patricia Castillo from San Antonio, Texas. Pam Ortiz, our administrative assistant, Don Maestas, who is a survivor and who will be speaking later today, and Rita Sanchez, who is our fiscal officer. So I'm the opposite of Terry. I can see better without my glasses. This has been a conference that has been packed with information about issues that are critical to the lives of women and girls. Whether we are Latina or Native American, Asian, white or African American, young or not so young, there is one thing that all of us here have in common, and that is that we are all concerned about the status of women, about the well-being of women, not only in this country but all over the world. And we have come here to stand up and let our voices be heard on behalf of women and girls. We are here because we believe that the lives of women and girls are just as valuable as those of men and boys. We are here to protect and promote the issues that are near and dear to us. But sadly, not everyone in our society thinks as we do. Not everyone believes that the lives of women and girls are to be valued. Not everyone believes that women should have the same rights as men. We like to think that we have come a long way in the evolution of humankind. But have we really? Because today, in the 21st century, we are still trying to convince millions that the lives of women and girls need to be valued. And until we are successful in instilling this in everyone, this very basic idea that the lives of women and girls are just as valuable as the lives of men and boys, we are going to continue to see violence against women at epidemic proportions. I don't have time to list statistics, but suffice it to say that gender-based violence is the most widespread human rights violation on our planet. In every city and town across the globe, every single day, women and girls are being raped, beaten, sold, or murdered. And this issue, this is one of the issues that impacts or intersects with just about every facet of our lives, every institution, every system in our society. Healthcare, law enforcement, criminal and civil courts, social services, workplaces, economics, childcare, housing and homelessness, colleges, churches. And because it affects our society at so many different levels, because it is such a widespread and massive problem, it cannot be left to those in the fields of sexual and domestic violence alone to try to stop it. I also want to emphasize that we cannot continue to view domestic and sexual violence as women's issues and left to women alone to try to stop them. I do see a sprinkling of men here, brave men who are here to support our issues. But I do want to say, let's hold the men accountable, not just those who batter and rape, but all men. It's not good enough for men to say, I am not a batterer, I am not a rapist, I don't disrespect women. They need to join the movement as allies and do their share to stop the violence. They need to confront their fathers, brothers, sons, nephews, co-workers, their drinking buddies, the guys they play golf or go fishing with. There are no innocent bystanders when it comes to gender violence. As the old adage says, if we are not part of the solution, we're part of the problem. And there is one other point that I want to make this time about women, that while feminists might get the need to value the lives of women and girls and put an end to the violence perpetrated against them, believe me when I say that too many women outside of this conference hall still don't get it. Remember, not all women are feminists. Not every woman holds near and dear the things that feminists do, unfortunately. So while we have come a long way in the last 30 or 40 years in the struggle against violence against women and girls, we still have a long ways to go. I would like to share with you just a couple of the awful things that we in the domestic violence field hear and read about all the time. We still hear a lot of people saying that domestic violence is a personal matter and that it really isn't their business. If it's not happening to them directly, they don't want to be involved. Some people don't even like to talk about domestic violence or rape because it makes them feel uncomfortable. But turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to domestic and sexual violence is not even the worst part of what's happening. We have a lot of people who are blaming the victims for the violence they have endured. Family members, clergy, neighbors, co-workers. The female president of a foundation that gives funds to domestic violence told me in a meeting several years ago here in Albuquerque, and when are we going to teach young girls how to start dressing properly? Insinuating, like so many other people in our society, that victims of rape are somehow responsible for what happens to them. And worse still, there are those charged with protecting and defending and helping victims of sexual and physical violence. The police, the prosecutors, the judges, what are they saying and doing? Let me just read quickly, and I'm trying to keep in time, but a 54-year-old former high school teacher was sentenced to 30 days in jail for raping a student. A Montana district judge said that the 14-year-old victim was older than her chronological age and as much in control as the teacher. 21 suspects were charged with a videotaped gang rape of an 11-year-old girl. Residents said the victim wore makeup and dressed like a 20-year-old, 11-year-old girl. What was her mother thinking, one neighbor asked. A young Latina, Lara Acevedo, was killed by her 19-year-old boyfriend in Arkansas. The killer had been in jail for a previous assault against her. A male judge allowed him to bond out on credit despite a previous ruling by a female judge saying he should not be allowed to do so. When asked how Carroll County could improve its handling, the sheriff said, "The question you're asking me is what's wrong with the courts? I'm asking you what's wrong with the women." Grudick said domestic violence prevention should focus on why women return to their abusers and that it wasn't logical or responsible to think the criminal justice system could solve the problem. Our sister here already spoke about what Angela Corey is doing against Marisa Alexander, so I won't go into that. And I know my time is up, but I just want, I don't just want to talk about the bad stuff that people have been doing, but because I wanted to mention just I drew up a list of very creative events and activities that people have taken it upon themselves. So I'm just going to share a couple of them real quickly. In 1999, there was a woman in New Jersey, Gladys Ricard, was murdered by a former abusive boyfriend while she was dressed in her wedding gown. She was going to marry somebody else. He barged into the house while she was taking photos, dressed in her wedding gown, and murdered her in cold blood. The media came out, and a lot of the community members came out and said that she was responsible for her death. A young woman in Miami, Florida, another Dominican woman, heard the story, was outraged, and decided to put on her wedding gown and march from New York City to Florida. It took her 3 months, 1,600 miles to raise attention, to bring attention. Every year now in New York City and several other cities, women are marching in wedding gowns, accompanied by men in the streets of New York City and other areas. I just want to tell you one short story about Dawn Maestas here, a survivor of many years, many relationships of violence, has used her tattoo removal business here in Albuquerque to remove tattoos that were put there by former abusive boyfriends and husbands. She's become an ardent advocate and has inspired many journalists, to print stories and put radio all the way in New Mexico, across the country, and as far away as Ireland. We have one more thing to ask. We brought, Terry, and I don't know how to do this, we brought pledge cards for each and every one of you because we want you to do at least one action in the next month against domestic violence. We brought pledge cards that we would like to hand out, and maybe Terry can, okay? Thank you so much.